All right. Hi. I want to do this video and do the review for part 4 of War and Peace, or sorry, volume 4 of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This volume, is about 200-ish, 220 pages long. And it's really, really good. I enjoyed it. Like, I've kind of made this statement in the last video with volume 3 that it honestly is starting to read more like a history book, and then bringing in those fictional characters as it kind of goes along the decline of the French, the decline of Napoleon, and how the actual battle comes to an end, and how this war actually comes to the end, and Russia's kind of victory over the French, the burning of Moscow, and then the French retreat. Volume 4 was really interesting because it shows the decline of the French, which I really enjoyed seeing. But it also brings up, and Tolstoy does a really good job of this throughout volume 4, and I've read the first 4 chapters of the epilogue, which I'll talk about maybe tomorrow. Or sometime later this week. But this talks about the French and their inability to keep Moscow after it's burnt. And historically, Napoleon and the French show up into Moscow. It has been burned down. They don't know what to do. They see this as a great loss. And I think it's cool how Tolstoy comes into this saying that Napoleon tries to kind of reinvigorate the French, that everybody kind of gets this hit of their morale, and they don't know what to do with the fact that Moscow is completely, for the most part, uninhabited. There's not much left. A lot of the Russians went through and looted, or they took all of their belongings, and then the Russian peasants that lived there went through, took pretty much everything else they could get before they went out into kind of the outskirts of the town towards the forest, and then into some neighboring communities, that when the French show up, there's really just a bare bones populace left over. I mean, there's like bars and pubs basically are left open with the kind of lower life people, like not socially lower, but just like kind of slimy people like burglars and robbers and looters. But then you also have the peasant class, the people that really can't afford to leave, and they're all trying to figure out what to do now that the French are in Moscow. But the city is also on fire. Tolstoy brings it up throughout every single chapter, how Moscow, a new section, a new suburb, a new neighborhood, has started on fire and burned to the ground. And I think it's really interesting. They show this from Napoleon's and from the French perspective about what Napoleon tries to do with the remaining population in Moscow, and what his goal is to kind of restore order to the city with the small amount of people that are left. And he says he's going to issue all these proclamations. He's going to have all of these new laws put in place. The French soldiers are going to stop looting stop looting homes and buildings and businesses, and they're going to fall in line. He's going to establish this new police force, this new fire brigade, and he's going to try and basically kind of redo Moscow with all of these rules. And part of it is he tries to appeal to, look at how we've accomplished this in other towns and other capitals through these other conquests. Look at what, Berlin, look at Vienna, look at Rome, look at what these Italian cities, these Austrian cities, these German cities, look at what all this looks like, and they're all super happy about it. You guys in Moscow should be too. And it fails miserably because the French soldiers, you see this in Moscow, that the French are starting to lose sight of Napoleon's goal. And he has a harder and harder time to wrangle the French soldiers. And then you see that even more with the retreat from Moscow, after Napoleon doesn't do any of those things, and can't accomplish that goal and that task, and then abandons the city anyway, and retreats and leaves and goes off and starts going back to France, or back west. So that was a great part of volume 4. I thought it was really interesting to see a little bit of the beginning of Napoleon's downfall, but Napoleon remains a quote-unquote great man. That even though he's failing, nobody is quite that upset with him yeah, about these failures. And you see that throughout his life. And that's something I want to talk about when I do the epilogue video, because Tolstoy really dives into what kind of person is Napoleon and how did he build this whole big persona of him being phenomenal. And I'll talk about that later. So it's really great to see kind of the decline of the French, the decline of Napoleon, as far as conquest did not last forever. And the French have had a really, really hard time in Moscow for XYZ reason, like the burning, the inability to set up a police force, and the fact that the French soldiers have just dispersed and aren't listening to much reason anymore. They're not as unified as they had been in the past. They're kind of becoming their own people, and they're looking for rewards for what they've done. Another part of this that I really like is Volume 3 leaves off with Pierre defending the Armenian woman, one of those people that were left in the city after saving her daughter. And then Pierre is captured by the French troops because he attacks some of the French for harassing this peasant woman within Moscow and trying to find her kid. This volume goes through a little bit, or not a little bit, but I think it focuses a lot on Pierre and kind of what happens to him after he's captured. And Pierre has a very interesting kind of change throughout this whole book. He goes from this single bachelor, womanizing alcoholic, kind of a nobody, to inheriting the largest fortune in aristocratic Russia, becomes incredibly well known. He becomes this great count. He marries a woman he doesn't quite like. Their relationship crumbles, and then he finds the Freemasons. He finds religion, and then he ends up having this desire for war and to go see what war is actually like on the front. And then he sees that, and he develops all of these tendencies, almost like PTSD, or these incredibly traumatic experiences. And there's so much to Pierre throughout each volume. It's almost a different character, but he reflects back on who he was, and he has all these different relapses, all of these different, he sees himself in something and then he's back to his old ways, or something along those lines. Pierre has grown on me quite a bit. I really didn't care for Pierre right off the bat, but he's a very interesting character, especially you see this come out in Volume 4. Where he's captured and Pierre is sentenced to death. They catch him originally for being one that he's an arsonist. He's one of them that started the city on fire. And then he's sentenced to death for being a spy. And then he's spared. There's 4 people killed and executed. He's left alone and survives and is now a prisoner. And then it's about him developing this idea of what happiness is in his life as a prisoner. And he meets this other prisoner's name is Platon, or Platon, however you pronounce it. His last name is Karatayev. So Platon Karatayev, he meets him, and Pierre believes that Platon is this, like, the epitome of simplicity, happiness, that this is a very old, sickly man, but he's living his life. He has all of these great stories, and he constantly talks to Pierre about these, and he shares all of these stories as the French are leaving Moscow, and they're on this walk, and Pierre makes a really big point that his feet hurt a lot. Like, he's worn through his shoes, his feet are bruised and battered and blistered, but he continues to move on. And at one point throughout Volume 4, Pierre makes a really good comparison to what is happiness, like, is money and wealth and power and status really that much better than being a prisoner? He says that even though you have a soft bed, you have a big house, you are just as confined and constricted as he is, or as a person is as a prisoner. That, yes, he's worried about his feet and he's worried about his shoes, but then he's also got the same level of worry, just in a different life, with the wealth and the happiness, or even the quote-unquote happiness and the status. That Pierre starts to compare his life as a prisoner, the very bottom of the barrel, to the wealthiest man in Russia, the very tippy top of that same barrel. And he says it's all the same suffering, just with different masks. And I thought that was kind of cool to see those comparisons. I really like to see that in books, but then in real life too, that everybody isn't just super happy here and then really sad at the bottom, that everybody has problems. They're just different degrees, or you have different worries, but that doesn't mean that they're any less of a worry than somebody else. And I like that Tolstoy places that on Pierre as this incredibly divisive and important character throughout this story. One aspect of this that really bums me out is the movement away from Moscow for the Russians, and then also the invasion of the French and the retreat of the French. You see several characters die in this volume, which I know is on brand for these 19th century Russian authors like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. It's really sad that there's not a happy ending. And you see that, and I don't want to add any spoilers, but you see a lot of characters that you kind of grow up with in this book go away. For one, Kutuzov, the commander-in-chief, he passes away after you see a lot of these victories for the Russians in the French retreat. One that hit me pretty hard, because he was my favorite, was Prince Andrei. I said for Volume 3, we kind of end with him getting injured and developing this whole like love of life again, and he sees these people he considered his enemy, but now he loves them, and he believes in this whole big divinity, this big divine idea of what love is, and that you truly accept religion and God if you can find a reason to love everybody regardless of what your physical human belief is. There's this kind of transcendent love that extends towards all, regardless of whether you as an individual like them or not. Andrei and Tolstoy threw me for a loop because Andrei's doing really, really bad. He's in a really bad way. And then he sees Natasha, because Natasha learns that Andrei is traveling with their kind of caravan through out of Moscow and then into Russia. And he starts to get a little bit better from what I was led to believe by the book, and then all of a sudden his sister shows up, and now he's gone. And it was a really sad bit. It was very reminiscent of his father, I believed. How he's going in and out of not consciousness, but of reality. And he sees Natasha. He loves Natasha. One of the last things that he says, he's kind of all there. He sees his son. He sees little Prince Nikolai, and that's really hard. And then his sister and all of these other people. And Pierre has no idea, his best friend. And eventually Natasha, they end up running into each other again, and he breaks the news to Natasha that Prince Andrei has passed away. And it's like character after character that you start to like and you love. And now we're at this really weird place where they're dying. And it just weird how it hits you when you think of it as just a bunch of words on a piece of paper, but you develop a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings when you read these stories. But also I think something this big, you spend a lot of time with a lot of these characters. I mean, throughout a lot of this, I've been looking forward to Andrei's chapters and Andrei's sections. So to have him gone now and still have a few hundred pages left is a strange feeling that they keep referencing back to him, but he's no longer there. And then there's another one. I don't want to bring it up too much again. I don't want to spoil a ton, but that was also a really sad one just because this character was very, very young. And it was probably Andrei's, you could kind of tell as he got more and more involved in the war, you could probably tell he was one that was going to go away. The younger one, I think the last death in this volume was also really difficult because it was just happened. Like Andrei's led up to it. This character was just happy one minute, gone the next. So that was also just like a really weird emotional hit. And Pierre is actually there when this one happens. And this is where we see Pierre's kind of storyline merge back with this character, and then eventually merges back in with Natasha and Princess Maria and Sonia and all of these different people. Volume 4 was great. Again, very much like a history book with fictional characters mixed in with it, but great. I love how it talks about, the reality behind these actual historical figures like Kutuzov, like Napoleon, like Alexander, like the kind of mayor, governor of Moscow, Rostopchin. Like, it's cool that they bring all of this up And Tolstoy kind of gives you a taste of what these implications for the war is like, and for Napoleon, his outbursts, his desire for dominance in Europe, his desire for invading Russia. And then kind of the flip side of that coin, how could things have been prevented, or being alive after the fact and seeing all of the data and the sources, what decisions could have been made that seem really blatantly obvious now, or at the time that Tolstoy's writing this, 50 years later. What could have changed, and what could have allowed Russia to kind of come out on top and not experience the series of events that unfolded as the French are showing up, as they're sacking the city, and as Moscow is burning and in that retreat. So Volume 4, two thumbs up. I mean, 4.9 out of 5 stars. Absolutely great. The only thing, the 0.1, is Andrei's death, but it needed to happen. It's an emotional moment, and that's what makes these books really, really good, are those emotional moments. And it's not everything is always a happy ending, and I think that's also a really important aspect of this book, is the realities of war and love and society and class differences. That this isn't, these characters, even though that they are super wealthy, they can't avoid the fight. They can't avoid being injured. They can't avoid dying sporadically and just immediately. That is the reality of this. And I think Tolstoy does a really good job, even though it is relatively pessimistic and really, really sad. I think it's a good way to kind of come up to the end and tie this up with a nice, neat bow. So the epilogue is great so far. I have exactly 90 pages left. I'm looking forward to finishing it up and moving on to the next read. But this has been a good book. This is one I for sure would read a second time, and I would probably go through and annotate a lot of this, do the character mapping, words or events, things that I don't quite understand or things that I may have missed, to highlight, bookmark, put in little sticky notes, sticky tabs. But this is a really dense book. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to follow, but coming up on the end, this is a really, really great read with a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings, and a lot of great historic events as well. I mean, Tolstoy has done a great job with combining fictional romance and beliefs with actual reality and things that happened at the beginning of the 19th century. So phenomenal section, phenomenal volume, and again, the epilogue so far has been great. This tackles a lot of those bigger ticket questions, like who is Napoleon, who is Alexander, who is Kutuzov, and how do all of these characters play into the events that happened and unfolded during this 1812 invasion of Russia, and how could that have been avoided? What dominoes fell into perfect place to make this story happen? So I will make a video on that here within the next probably day or two. And I just want to say thank you so much for kind of following along with me on this ride. And I look forward to finishing this one and doing some more videos on other books. So thank you. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. Bye.